before continuing on with the narrative of the Buddha continuing to gather disciples and people going forth, and the narrative of after he goes back to his homeland and what happens there. I was going to flesh out the lives of Sariputta and Moggallana first, from Great Disciples of the Buddha by Nyanaponika, Thera, and Hellmuth Hecker. And this will just be from the early parts of the lives of Venerables Sariputta and Moggallana. In many temples of Sri Lanka, you will find, on either side of the Buddha image, the statues of two monks. Their robes are draped over one shoulder, and they stand in the attitude of reverence with joined palms. You'll also find that in Thailand, of course. Sometimes they're kneeling, sometimes they're standing. I've seen both. Quite often, there are a few flowers at their feet, laid there by some pious devotee. If you ask who they are, you will be told that they are the enlightened one's two chief disciples, the Arhants Sariputta and Mahamoggallana. They stand in the positions they occupied in life, Sariputta on the Buddha's right, Mahamoggallana on his left. When the great stupa at Sanchi was opened up in the middle of the last century, the relic chamber was found to contain two stone receptacles. The one to the north held the bodily relics of Mahamoggallana, while that on the south enclosed those of Sariputta. Thus they had lain while the centuries rolled past and the history of 2,000 years and more played out the drama of impermanence in human life. The Roman Empire rose and fell, the glories of ancient Greece became a distant memory. New religions wrote their names, often with blood and fire, on the changing face of the earth, only to mingle at last with legends of Thebes and Babylon. And gradually the tides of commerce shifted the great centers of civilization from east to west, while generations that had never heard the teachings of the Buddha arose and passed away. But all the time that the ashes of the holy disciples lay undisturbed, forgotten in the land that gave them birth, their memory was held dear wherever the Buddha's message spread, and the record of their lives was passed down from one generation to another, first by word of mouth, then in the written pages of the Buddhist Tipitaka, the most voluminous and detailed scripture of any religion. Next to the enlightened one himself, it is these two disciples of his who stand highest in the veneration of Buddhists in the Theravada lands. Their names are as inseparable from the annals of Buddhism as that of the Buddha himself. If it has come about that in the course of time many legends have been woven into the tradition of their lives, this is but the natural outcome of the devotion that has always been felt for them. And that high esteem was fully justified. Few religious teachers have been so well served by their immediate disciples as was the Buddha. This you will see as you read these pages, for they tell the story of one of the two greatest of them, the Venerable Sariputta, who was second only to the Buddha in the depth and range of his understanding and his ability to teach the doctrine of deliverance. In the Tipitaka, there is no connected account of his life, but it can be pieced together from the various incidents scattered throughout the canonical texts and commentaries in which he figures. Some of them are more than incidents, for his life is so closely interwoven with the life and ministry of the Buddha that he plays an essential part in it. And on a number of occasions, it is Sariputta himself who takes the leading role, as skilled preceptor and exemplar, as kind and considerate friend, as guardian of the welfare of the bhikkhus under his charge, as faithful repository of his master's doctrine, the function which earned him the title of Dhamma Senapati, Marshal of the Dhamma, and always as himself a man unique in his patience and steadfastness, modest and upright in thought, word, and deed, a man to whom one act of kindness was a thing to be remembered with gratitude so long as life endured. Even among the Arahants, those freed from all defilements of passion and delusion, he shone like the full moon in a starry sky. This then is the man of profound intellect and sublime nature, a true disciple of the great teacher, whose story we have set down to the best of our ability in the pages that follow. If you, the reader, can gather from this imperfect record something of the qualities of a perfected human being, fully liberated and raised to the highest level of realization, and of how such a person acts and speaks and comports himself toward his fellows, and if the reading of it gives you strength and faith in the assurance of what a human being may become, then our work has been worthwhile and is fully rewarded. The quest for the Dhamma, early life. The story begins at two Brahmanical villages in India called Upatissa and Kolita, which lay not far from the city of Rajagaha. Before our Buddha had appeared in the world, a Brahmin woman named Rupasari, living in Upatissa village, conceived, and so too on the same day at Kolita village did another Brahmin woman whose name was Mogali. The two families were closely connected, having been friends with one another for 7 generations. From the first day of their pregnancy, the families gave due care to the mothers-to-be, and after 10 months, both women gave birth to boys on the same day. On the name-giving day, Rupasari's child received the name Upatissa, as he was a son of the foremost family of that village, and for the same reason, Mogali's son was named Kolita. When the boys grew up, they were educated and acquired mastery of all the sciences. Each of them had a following of 500 Brahmin youths, and when they went to the river or park for sport and recreation, Upatissa used to go with 500 palanquins, and Kolita with 500 horse carriages. Now at Rajagaha, there was an annual event called the Hilltop Festival. Seats were arranged for both youths, and they sat together to witness the celebrations. When there was an occasion for laughter, they laughed. When the spectacle was exciting, they became excited, and they paid their fees for the extra shows. In this manner, they enjoyed the festival for a second day. On the third day, however, strange thoughts cast their shadows across their hearts, and they could no longer laugh or share in the excitement. As they sat there, watching the plays and dances, for just a moment the specter of human mortality revealed itself to their inner vision, and once they had caught a glimpse of it in their attitude, could never again be the same. For each, this somber mood gradually crystallized into a compelling question. What is there to look at here? Before these people have reached 100 years, they will all be dead. Shouldn't we go seek a teaching of deliverance? It was with such thoughts in mind that on this third day they sat through the festival. Kolita noticed that his friend seemed pensive and withdrawn and asked him, "What is the matter, my dear Upatissa? Today you are not happy and joyous as you were on the other days, but you seem to be troubled about something. Tell me, what is it on your mind?" "My dear Kolita, I have been thinking that there is no benefit at all for us enjoying these hollow shows. Instead of wasting my time on such festivals, what I really ought to do is seek a path of deliverance from the entire round of rebirths. But you too, Kolita, seem to be discontented." And Kolita replied, "My thoughts are exactly the same as yours." When he knew that his friend shared his inclination, Upatissa said, "That was a good thought of ours. However, for those who seek a teaching of deliverance, there's only one thing to do, to leave the home life and become ascetics. But under whom shall we live the ascetic life?" At that time there lived at Rajagaha a wandering ascetic, Paribhajika, named Sanjaya, who had a great following of pupils. Deciding to take ordination under him, Upatissa and Kolita approached him, each with his own following of 500 Brahmin youths, and all of them received ordination from Sanjaya. And from the time of their ordination under him, Sanjaya's reputation and support increased abundantly. And then there's the story that Longpo already read in his teachings, and I'll jump over to just the meeting with Asaji and review that. Serene are your features, friend, pure and bright is your complexion. Under whom have you gone forth as an ascetic? Who is your teacher, and whose doctrine do you profess? Assaji replied, There is, friend, a great recluse, a scion of the Sakyas, who has gone forth from the Sakya clan. I have now gone forth under him, that blessed one. That blessed one is my teacher, and it is his Dhamma that I profess. What does the Venerable One's master teach? What does he proclaim? Questioned thus, the elder Assaji thought to himself, These wandering ascetics are opposed to the Buddha's teaching. I shall show him how profound this teaching is. So he said, I am but new to the training, friend. It is not long since I went forth from home, and I came but recently to this doctrine and discipline. I cannot explain the Dhamma in detail to you. The wanderer replied, I am called Upatissa, friend. Please tell me according to your ability, be it much or little. It will be my task to penetrate its meaning by way of 100 or 1,000 methods. And he added, Be it little or much that you can tell, the meaning only please proclaim to me. To know the meaning is my sole desire. Of no use to me are many words. In response, the elder Assaji uttered this stanza. Of those things that arise from a cause, the Tathagata has told the cause, and also what their cessation is. This is the doctrine of the Great Recluse. And then very briefly, we'll go into the legend of past life of Sariputta, wandering in spiritual search. The original aspiration. Now this is when, at the bamboo grove, after Mahamoggallana, it took him 1 week to attain arhatship, took Sariputta 2 weeks, and after that he declares them as the foremost disciples. And the bhikkhus are talking about this. Now it may be asked, did not Sariputta possess great wisdom? And if so, why did he attain arhatship later than Moggallana? The answer, according to the commentaries, is because of the greatness of the preparations required. When poor people want to go anywhere, they take to the road at once, but in the case of kings, extensive preparations must be made, and these require time. So too it is in order to become the first chief disciple of a Buddha. And then this is where the bhikkhus are talking about what just happened. On that same day, when the evening shadows had lengthened, the master called his disciples to assembly and bestowed upon the 2 elders the rank of chief disciples. At this, some monks were displeased and murmured among themselves, The master should have given the rank of chief disciples to those who were ordained first, that is, the group of 5 disciples, or if not to them, then either to the group of 55 bhikkhus headed by Yasa, or to the 30 of the auspicious group, or else to the 3 Kassapa brothers. But passing over all these great elders, he has given it to those whose ordination was the very last of all. The master inquired about the subject of their talk. When they told him, he said, I do not show preference, but give to each what he has aspired to. When, for instance, Anya Kondanya in a previous life gave alms 9 times during a single harvest, he did not aspire to chief discipleship. His aspiration was to be the very first to penetrate to the highest state, arhatship, and so it came about. But many aeons ago, at the time of the Buddha Anomadasi, Sariputta and Moggallana made the aspiration for chief discipleship, and now the conditions for the fulfillment of that aspiration have ripened. Hence I have given them just what they aspired to, and did not do so out of preference, the original aspiration. The Buddha's statement underscores a fundamental tenet of Buddhist thought. that who we are and what we reap as our life's destiny is not the product simply of our intentions and activities within the brief span of time that began with our physical birth, but reflects a deep wellspring of past experience accumulated in the beginningless round of rebirths, samsara. Thus, the story of Sariputa, the great disciple, properly begins in the distant past with events that have been preserved for us in the form of legend. Such legends, however, are not mere fictions spun by an excessively vibrant imagination. They are, rather, narrative representations of principles that are too profound and universal to be reduced to mere matters of historical fact, principles that can be adequately conveyed only by turning facts into sacred archetypes and archetypes into spiritual ideals. This spiritual legend unfolds one incalculable period, asankhya, and 100,000 aeons in the past. At that time, the being who was to become the Venerable Sariputa was born into a rich Brahmin family and was given the name Sarada. At the same time, the future Moggallana was born into a wealthy householder family and was named Sariputa. The two families were acquainted, and the boys became playmates and close friends. On the death of his father, Sarada inherited the vast family fortune, but before long, reflecting in solitude on his own inevitable mortality, he decided to abandon all his property and go forth, seeking a path to deliverance. Sarada approached his friend Sariputa and invited him to join him on his quest, but Sariputa, still too strongly attached to the world, refused. Sarada, however, was firm in his decision. He gave away all his wealth, left the household, and took up the life of a matted hair ascetic. Quickly and without difficulty, he mastered the mundane meditative attainments and supernormal powers and attracted to himself a band of disciples. Thus his hermitage gradually became home to a large community of ascetics. At this time, the Buddha Anumadasi, the 18th Buddha, counting back from the present Buddha Gautama, had arisen in the world. One day, on emerging from meditative absorption, the Buddha Anumadasi cast his net of knowledge out upon the world and beheld the ascetic Sarada and his retinue. Realizing that a visit to this community would bring about great benefits to many beings, he left behind his monks and journeyed to their hermitage alone. Sarada noticed the marks of physical excellence on the body of his visitor, and at once understood that his guest was a fully enlightened one. He humbly offered him a seat of honor and provided him with a meal from the food gathered by his disciples. Meanwhile, the Buddha Anumadasi's monks had come to join him at the hermitage, 100,000 arhants free from defilements, led by the two chief disciples, Nisaba and Anoma. To honor the Buddha, the ascetic Sarada took a large canopy of flowers and, standing behind the Blessed One, held it over his head. The master entered the attainment of cessation, Nirodha Samapati, the meditative state wherein perception, feeling, and other mental processes utterly cease. He remained absorbed in this state for a full week, while throughout that entire week, Sarada stood behind him, holding aloft the canopy of flowers. At the end of the week, the Buddha emerged from the attainment of cessation and requested his two chief disciples to give talks to the community of ascetics. When they had finished speaking, he himself spoke, and at the end of his discourse, all the ascetic pupils of Sarada attained arhantship and asked to be admitted to the Buddha's order of monks. Sarada, however, did not attain arhantship, nor any other stage of sanctity. For as he listened to the discourse of the chief disciple Nisaba and observed his pleasing deportment, the aspiration arose in his mind to become the first chief disciple of a Buddha in the future. Thus, when the proceedings were finished, he approached the Buddha Anumadasi, prostrated himself at his feet, and declared, "Lord, as the fruit of the act of homage I performed toward you by holding the canopy of flowers over you for a week, I do not aspire for rulership over the gods, nor for the status of Mahabrahma, nor for any other fruit but this, that in the future I might become the chief disciple of a fully enlightened one." The master thought, will his aspiration succeed? and sending out his knowledge into the future, he saw that it would. Then he spoke to Sarada thus: "This aspiration of yours will not be barren. In the future, after an incalculable age and 100,000 aeons, a Buddha by the name of Gautama will arise in the world, and you will be his first chief disciple, the marshal of the Dhamma, named Sariputa." And then I'll just go a little bit into the life of Mahamoggallana, because there's some overlap, but it goes a little bit more in depth about their being at the big party and his thoughts of dispassion toward it. This is from the chapter on Mahamoggallana, master of psychic powers. In a small town named Kolita, near Rajagaha, capital of the kingdom of Magadha, a child was born who was destined to become the second chief disciple of the Buddha. The boy's parents named him Kolita after the town. The family belonged to the Moggallana clan, one of the most illustrious Brahmin clans of the period, which claimed direct descent from the ancient Vedic seer Mudgala. The town was inhabited entirely by Brahmins, and in its religious attitudes and social customs, it was extremely conservative. Kolita's father was born of the most prominent family from which the town's mayor was usually appointed. Being a member of such a high caste and of the town's most respected family, his father was almost a petty king. Thus, Kolita was raised in an environment of wealth and honor, and his favorable circumstances shielded him from direct contact with the sorrows of life. He was educated entirely in the Brahmanic tradition, which upheld the belief in the reality of an afterlife and in the law of karma and its fruits. These beliefs permeated the everyday life of the Brahmins and determined the form and content of their rituals, which governed all aspects of their lives. Kolita's family lived on very friendly terms with another Brahmin family from a neighboring village. On the very day of Kolita's birth, a son was born to this other family, whom they named Upatissa. When the children grew up, they became fast friends, and before long were inseparable. Whatever they did together, whether it was play or study, pleasure or work. Always the two boys were seen together, and their undisturbed friendship was to last until the end of their lives. In their temperaments, the two were quite different. Upatissa was more adventuresome, daring, and enterprising, while Kolita's tendency was to preserve, to cultivate, and to enrich what he had gained. Their places within their families were also different. Kolita was the only child, but Upatissa had three brothers and 3 sisters. Yet, despite the differences in their characters, they never quarreled or came into conflict, but always dwelt on amicable terms, maintaining a steadfast loyalty and self-sacrificing devotion. The two friends were enamored with the intoxications of youth, health, and life. Each was the leader of a group of friends with whom he engaged in play and sport. When they went to the river, Kolita's companions came on horseback, and those of Upatissa were carried in palanquins. Each year, Rajagaha hosted a grand public celebration called the Hilltop Festival, which featured popular shows and amusements. The two friends looked forward to this event with keen anticipation and reserved seats from which they could comfortably watch the entertainment, a mixture of folk comedies and old legends. On the first day of the festival, they were fully engrossed in the entertainment. When there was something to laugh at, they joined in the laughter. When there was something exciting, they became excited. They enjoyed the show so much that they returned on the second day and closely followed all the performances. Inexplicably, however, far from satisfying them, the entertainment left them with a deep feeling of discontent. Nevertheless, they made reservations for the third day too, and a new program had been announced in glowing terms. That night, strange thoughts haunted their hearts and disturbed their sleep. As Kolita tossed and turned in his bed, he kept on asking himself, "What is the use to us of this frivolity? Is there anything here really worth seeing? What benefit comes from a life devoted to enjoyment and pleasure-seeking? After a few years, these glamorous actors will all be old and feeble. They will leave the stage of life and continue their migrations through existence, driven on by craving, and we too will also have to move on. These actors cannot even help themselves to solve the problem of existence. How then can they help us? Instead of wasting our time with these festivities, we should seek a path to deliverance. Upatissa, too, had spent a restless night, disturbed by quite similar thoughts. He reflected how the ancient myths and legends dramatized in these performances presupposed the reality of rebirth, but the jokes and frolics overlaying those ideas in the plays insinuated that one need be concerned with this present life alone. Was this not an artificial suppression of truth by pretense and vain illusions? The next morning, when they took their seats, Kaulita said to his friend, "What is the matter with you? You are not your usual merry self. Is something troubling you?" His friend replied, "Last night, while I lay in bed, I kept on asking myself, what is the use to us of all these pleasures of eye and ear? They are absolutely worthless. Shouldn't we rather seek to find release from the devastating law of impermanence, to liberate ourselves from the fleeting illusions of life, which lure us on yet leave us empty? That is what has been weighing on my mind. But you too, dear Kaulita, seem morose today." Kaulita replied, "I have been thinking exactly the same thoughts. Why should we stay here any longer in this unholy vanity show? We should seek the way to deliverance." When Upatissa heard that his friend had the very same wish, he happily exclaimed, "That was a good thought that came to us both, independent of each other. We have wasted our time long enough with worthless frivolities, but if we earnestly seek a teaching of deliverance, we shall have to give up home and possessions and go forth as homeless wanderers, free of worldly and sensual bonds, rising above them like birds on the wing." So the two friends decided to undertake the life of ascetics, homeless mendicants, who then wandered along the roads of India, as they still do now, in search of a spiritual teacher, a guru who could guide them to the liberating knowledge of enlightenment. When they told their followers about their decision, these young men were so deeply impressed that most decided to join their friends in their spiritual quest. So all of them said farewell to their families, took off the sacred Brahmanic thread, cut off their hair and beards, and put on the pale saffron garments of religious wanderers. Discarding all distinguishing marks and privileges of their caste, they entered the classless society of ascetics. And then also I was going to read this brief teaching of Mahamoggallana's struggle for awakening, as Lumpur touched on it in his Dhamma talk. And this is where Mahamoggallana he's nodding, and he's struggling for awakening, and the Buddha senses this, appears to him. "Are you nodding, Moggallana? Are you nodding?" "Yes, Lord." "Well then, Moggallana, at whatever thought drowsiness descends upon you, you should not give attention to that thought or dwell on it. Then by doing so, it is possible that your drowsiness will vanish. But if by doing so, drowsiness does not vanish, then you should reflect upon the teaching as you have heard it and learned it, and you should ponder over it and examine it closely with your mind. Then by doing so, it is possible that your drowsiness will vanish. But if by doing so, drowsiness does not vanish, then you should repeat in full detail the teaching as you have heard it and learned it. You should pull," and then now it goes through this list. "If that doesn't work, you should pull both earlobes and rub your limbs with your hands. If that doesn't work, you should get up from your seat and, after washing your eyes with water, you should look around in all directions and upwards to the stars and constellations. If that doesn't work, you should give attention to the perception of light, to the perception of day, as by day so by night, as by night so by day. Thus, with your mind clear and unclouded, you should cultivate a mind that is full of brightness. If that doesn't work, with your senses turned inward and your mind not straying outward, you should walk up and down, being aware of going to and fro. Then by doing so, it is possible that your drowsiness will vanish. But if by doing so, drowsiness does not vanish, You may, mindfully and clearly aware, lie down lion-like on your right side, placing foot on foot, keeping in mind the thought of rising, and on awakening, you should quickly get up, thinking, I must not indulge in the comfort of resting and reclining in the pleasure of sleep. Thus, Moggallana, should you train yourself. Any questions about that reading? The great disciples?
Before, I'm wondering if you have any advice on how to follow that instruction to analyze the teachings, or recite the teachings when you're kind of dull and drowsy, because for me it's kind of difficult to do that. I guess it seems like it takes a lot of effort.
Exactly. That's the point. Well, I think I'll just sit here and wait until that drowsiness goes away. It's not really a strategy. Bringing up, consciously bringing up reflections on the teaching, and bringing up an analytic bent of the mind requires effort and application of attention. So that in itself is the overcoming of drowsiness. You can't be drowsy and engage your mind in skillful reflection.
For me, I notice when I try to analyze things, I get really stiff, maybe too heady, or the analysis seems really...
Well, I mean, it's you're paying attention to the result, so that being a bit heady is better than having your head on the floor while you're meditating. When it's so that it's just sort of what is it that's a balance that helps the mind to engage skillfully.
Like chanting too, I found, because he goes through analyzing Dhamma, but then he goes through reciting Dhamma, so that's chanting.
Yeah.
And so even if you're not able to analyze it, you can go to if that doesn't work, you go to the chanting, the actually verbalizing it. And I've get into this state sometimes where I'm drowsy, and I have this feeling like I just feel like sitting right. I don't feel like chanting. I don't feel like analyzing Dhamma. Yet I'm still not bright. I'm still drowsy. But it's this teaching of Luang Por Chao where he says, when you learn how to practice, you actually have to learn how to go against your feelings, go against what you feel like doing. It's like, if I chant, that's not sabai. That's not laid back. That's not. And we might feel like that's not the right way to practice, but actually we do have to put pressure on ourselves sometimes. Just a few more minutes, and I'll just start into this next section. Well, actually, this section it actually is really good as a whole. So actually, I won't get into this now. Start that tomorrow. Any more questions? 5 minutes.
Is there much known about Mahamoggallana's previous lives? We went into the Sariputta a little bit. But is there more backstory for Mahamoggallana?
Much more, yeah. Yeah, there's I recommend Majjhima Nikaya 50 if you're interested in. There's a whole sutta devoted to Mahamoggallana himself, talking about his past life as Mara. That's the one where he's like Mara under Buddha Vipassi or something, where he causes a youth to throw a rock at one of the disciples, hits him in the head, and he starts bleeding. And then the Buddha at that time turns the elephant turn and says, "Mara, you know no shame." And that was Mahamoggallana. That his name was Mara Dusi.
Is it that way for many of the devas? Like, they talk about Mara as like this holding an office, like a political office or something. Like these different people have held this position. Is it like Saka and a lot of the other cases of some of the previous lives? There's other Sakas, other people have been Saka, or is that? I'm just curious.
What do you think?
Well, yeah. I mean, I mean, that's the. One of the aspects of it is the Buddhist and ancient Indian conception of time is very different than say like say Near Eastern or Christian sense of time, where the whole universe happens in 4,000 years or whatever, and whereas how the Buddha and Buddhist and ancient Indian conception of time is something that is even this universe is only a manifestation of a part of a small part of a ongoing expansion and contraction of universes coming into being and passing away. So over time, then the taking birth and having a position within that being within that is constantly changed. So yeah, that sense of especially say beings of a certain merit and charisma, maybe, have obviously been doing this for a while and have been in the past of help, been in positions of, say, power, influence, and leadership in the past. So it's like it's a cyclic or ongoing. It is very, very. The time is very difficult to imagine, and it's also one of the big motivations for. This has been going on for a long time. You should be bored and fed up with this by now.
I think there's a whole chapter on Mara too in the Ajahn Buddhadhammo's Buddhist Cosmos. It goes into that a bit. And by the way, I seem to have misplaced the Abbot's Office copy of that, so if anybody can find a copy, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, I mean that's a incredible introduction to the cosmology of which I haven't even read myself. But listen to the discussions that Ajahn Sona and Ajahn Buddhadhammo did. There's about 10 or 12 discussions, and it's fun, actually.
I was wondering if you could provide a little guidance on distinguishing between skillful investigation and unskillful doubt as a hindrance. You can compare the results of where it's leading. For example, is it good to see, is this leading to simplification versus complication? Or is there other tools you could use, like comparing the quality of the intention, or?
Yeah, all of the above, as well as the actual feeling of it. Because skillful investigation brings up, it's associated with kind of a certain well-being, clarity. That's a distinguishing feature of the kusala citta. There's a kind of happy quality, as well as it being clear, as well as it being kind of steady and grounded.
Mm-hmm.
That's by its very nature so that's one of the ways that one can be discerning. Okay, am I just sitting here proliferating about something, or is this a fruitful line of inquiry? And if it's a fruitful line of inquiry, of investigation, there should be a sense of well-being, of clarity, of a kind of a steadiness there, a feeling. Whereas the opposite is true. If one's just doubting and or compulsively investigating something, even if it's got ticking all the boxes of Buddhist philosophy, anicca, dukkha, anatta, dependent origination, but the actual feeling is unsettled, unclear, not very happy, not very bright, then it's not a fruitful line of inquiry.